I don't know when this type of picture started or when it finally faded away, but I'll bet most every kid of my generation had a picture taken on just such a pony. Heck, maybe even the same pony. You didn't have to go to the photographer, they came to you. They'd hit your neighborhood up and the word would just get out. Well, you couldn't have a proper flat top or a crew cut without a little butch wax to dress it up. Even the boys with long hair used a bit of it just to keep it down. Here's my second grade class at Garner. There's more than a little butch wax on these knotheads. Except me, of course. Mama must have forgotten that it was picture day. This here was a classroom staple for us in early elementary school. No, not the cigars, but the box. These served as our personal storage boxes in our desk. We would store our little fat pencils, our stick erasers, safety scissors, juice money, marbles, our personal tube of 612, and any other treasures we just had to have at school. How boring it would have been to have to use the plastic pencil boxes the kids are using today. These had character and a little history. And speaking of 612, if you were of my generation, I bet you can close your eyes and transport yourself back to first or second grade and you can just smell it. If you don't know, this was our insect repellent. In Florida it was essential. You see, most of our school didn't have air conditioning or even window screens. There would be windows that went from the top of the radiator to the ceiling. It was one of the classroom work tasks to be charged with taking a long pole and helping to open the windows during warm weather, which in Polk County was most of the school year. The absence of window screens meant plenty of flies and gnats, gazillions of gnats. The 612 was our defense. Oh, and that juice money that was in the cigar boxes? Well, no soft drink machines for us back then. Your choice was the water fountain or the orange juice machine. For us, the juice came in these little triangular shaped cartons with a paper straw attached. Heck, it turns out we were green way before it was cool. And what would make that cold orange juice taste even better? If you bought it with a Mercury Head dime. Had we known then that Mercury Head dimes were over 90% pure silver and saved them instead of using them for juice, we'd all be rich. Every morning, every kid, with purpose and meaning, the Pledge of Allegiance was a meaningful part of our day. We were part of the post-World War II generation. Patriotism still meant something to us back then. I don't know when it stopped being a requirement in our public schools. I seem to remember it through high school. Ah, my favorite class. The lunchroom was also our auditorium. I remember when we had tables that actually folded back and turned into seating for events. It was loud and very social. Some kids brought their lunches from home, but most bought a lunch. My lunches at home generally consisted of a bologna sandwich, potted meat or Vienna sausage and crackers, or a peanut butter and jelly. These lunches were wonderful, especially the yeast roll that seemed as big as a dinner plate. I can smell them now. My second favorite class, mastering the monkey bars for speed and accuracy, was important for a 6 or 7-year-old boy. We all wanted to be the fastest ones to crawl through the maze of bars without busting our foreheads. Hanging upside down, jumping from the top into sand, all this was part of the code for little boys. Impress the girls with your physical prowess, but then run like heck if they even thought of talking to you. Yep, we were part of the first generation of kids to have TVs. They were all black and white sets, and the screens were quite small. This is the first TV I can remember from my childhood. There must have been 1,000 tubes inside those boxes that made it all work. I remember going down to the store on Havendale to check out suspected blown bulbs on this neat machine they had. You'd plug in each bulb in the appropriate socket, and if it lit up, the bulb was good. If not, then you could buy most any bulb and go home and get the set working again. Now, while we did have TVs, there weren't a whole lot of shows. Cable and satellite were still years away from development. In Polk County, you either had an outside antenna or you used rabbit ears, with tinfoil, of course. You could pick up the 3 networks and sometimes the PBS station. If my memory serves me correctly, CBS was on channels 6 and 13, NBC was channels 2 and 8, and ABC was channels 9 and 10. I think we were introduced to a UHF channel when I was a teenager. It was channel 44, WTOG. For that you had to use a little round wire antenna on the back of your set. In elementary school, the captain and his crew were part of our morning. We enjoyed the antics of Mr. Green Jeans, Dancing Bear, Mr. Moose, Mr. Bunny Rabbit, and the Talking Clock. We didn't know it then, but we were learning things about manners and developing friendships and such. Another morning staple was romper room. We learned how we were supposed to act when we started school. We were entertained, but we also learned important skills. I remember it vividly. It's etched in my mind. That fall day in November of 1963, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Root, was called to the door and given a message. We heard the gasp, and then she came back into the room in tears. The classroom was stone cold silent. When she regained her composure, she informed us that the president had been shot. It didn't really register to 6- and 7-year-old children, but we knew it must have been something bad if Mrs. Root was so upset. The British invasion began in 1964 when the Beatles showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show. The music scene would be forever changed. So much happened in the late 60s and early 70s that impacted our culture. Not all was bad. The music was groovy, man. Remember Shake-a-Puddin', RC Cola and moon pies, butternut candy bars, putting peanut in your Pepsi, checking out the bottom of the little Coca-Cola bottles to see where it was bottled? Playing marbles was a staple for us boys when we were kids. Aggie, shooters, onion skins, cat's eyes, bumblebees were just some of them. When you played for keeps. Sometimes marbles turned into a full contact sport too. At some point the beaver entered into our lives. He brought with him his parents, his brother Wally, and Wally's friends Lumpy and that rascallion Eddie Haskell. Beaver's friends were Larry, Gilbert, and Whitey, with Judy playing the role of the classmate who rained terror on the boys. Leave It to Beaver resonated with us. Most of us all had one in my neighborhood, a second-hand bicycle with a banana seat and high-rise handlebars. Pure utility. Served us for motocross, getting to school, jumping ditches, you name it. And if you needed a little sound effect, you just close-pinned a baseball card on the frame to create a suitable motorcycle sound. Sand Mountain. You had to see it and climb it to actually believe it existed in Florida. What fun it was for kids of all ages. I was able to climb it and slide down a few times as a kid before they finally ceased operation in the 60s. I'll bet a lawyer was involved in that. We had another local attraction that was fairly unique. Spook Hill was in Lake Wells. It was a great optical illusion that you enjoyed from your car. Basically, you pulled up to a line going downhill and put your car in neutral. Your car would then begin rolling back up the hill. Spooky, huh? It's still there. If you don't believe me, go give it a shot. This was my 4th grade class at Garner. I can still name all but a handful of these folks. See those windows I was talking about? I'm quite sure Ray Marie hated sitting in front of me. I was always picking at her, when Mrs. Langston wasn't looking, of course. Ray Marie is one of way too many of our classmates who left us too soon. Rest in peace, dear. Remember when Hot Wheels came out? Most of us boys had miles of orange track and dozens of cars. It was cheap racing fun. Sure, it was pretty campy compared to today's standards, but we believed in Batman and Robin. He wasn't a superhero back then. He was just a hero in a mask and cape. He used all these great gadgets to get out of trouble and capture the bad guys who incidentally kept escaping or getting set free. Gotham City must have been one rough place to live for sure. Hey, hey, we're the monkeys, and people say we monkey around. Yeah, and monkey around they did. They weren't exactly the Beatles, but they were way funnier. We were wearing Chuck Taylors way before they were cool. Before Disney changed Central Florida, for the worst I might add, there was Cypress Gardens, our very own theme park. Flowers, southern bells, sky islands, and awesome ski shows were a long-running staple in Winter Haven. Speaking of Disney, anyone remember the old ticket books? We still have a few of these at home. Maybe someday they'll be worth something again. Winter Haven was home to another roadside attraction, the Slocum Water Gardens. I never got to go, but they definitely knew how to grow some monster water lilies. Winter Haven had a couple of nicknames, the City of 100 Lakes and the Citrus Capital of the World. Both were true, by the way. They still have 100 lakes, but unfortunately the citrus industry has moved south. There were a number of citrus packing houses and various types of citrus processing plants throughout the area. My mother worked for many years at the Winter Haven Citrus Growers Association packing house. It was big and loud and stifling hot. I can still smell the citrus scent on her clothes when she came home from work, and I remember the purple ink that she never seemed to be able to wash away, at least during citrus season. An unbelievable amount of citrus came through places like Adams Packing House. A great many members of my family were in the citrus business, mostly as pickers, packers, and factory workers. For years, my folks would work in Florida during the citrus season and then travel to Michigan to pick blueberries during the off-season. Fortunately for me, they stopped doing that kind of labor when I was born. I've picked fruit. It isn't for the weak or the faint-hearted. Sometimes the living accommodations left much to be desired as you followed the fruit. This wasn't one of the places my family stayed, but they did stay in converted chicken coops and boxcars. Remember Salty Saul Fleshman? We got our daily fishing report and dose of humor from him. Quite a character. And how about Ernie Lee, the Tennessee gentleman? His morning show was fun to watch before heading off to school. Get out and go fishing. It's good for you, was one of his bylines. It must have been around 4th grade or so when bell-bottoms started to be seen in our neck of the woods. I don't remember the year, but my first pair were blue with gold stripes. Or maybe they were gold with blue stripes. I don't really remember. I just remember I was finally cool. I was hip. In my own mind, of course. Yeah, I seem to vaguely remember Sizzlers. Oh, who am I kidding? Of course I remember Sizzlers. What I don't remember is any math, English, or history during that time period. I think I was just too distracted. Before we had the first mall in Winter Haven, we had Northgate. Darn near everything you might need could be found there. That's one of the earliest Publix supermarkets right there. And speaking of Publix, did you know the very first Publix was built in Winter Haven? Where shopping is a pleasure. It still is, and now they're serving 7 states. This landmark building was demolished a few years ago. The Florida Citrus Dome was one of the home of the annual Florida Citrus Festival for many years. You have to admit, it's pretty distinctive. But who remembers where the Citrus Festival was held before the Orange Dome was built? At Nora Mayo Hall in downtown Winter Haven, of course. The opening act for the Florida Citrus Festival was the annual Citrus Parade in Winter Haven. This was a huge parade with dozens of floats and high school bands, the Shriners in their clown cars and Harleys and much more. I used to go to work with my mother at the packing house, and they would have a big flatbed truck pulled up between the packing house and the road for employees to watch the parade. It was always a great time. We also had our very own professional baseball team when the Boston Red Sox came to town for spring training. It was a great opportunity for us young kids to see big-time players like Carl Yastrzemski. You know, I cannot imagine that we didn't do ourselves long-term harm, but man, wasn't it fun to run behind the mosquito spray truck as it churned out pesticides in a big fog. What the heck were we thinking, and why didn't our parents rein us in? Well, here was a toy that would have been better off to not have been invented. Imagine, if you would, two cue balls, rock hard, tied to a string. You hold a string in the middle and you try to get the balls to hit each other on the upswing and then again on the downswing, and then keep it going. Sounds easy, right? No. I can't tell you the pain inflicted by these things. Knuckles, elbows, foreheads, you name it, it got smacked. I think we all learned a few new curse words during the phase of this toy. Oh, and if you did manage to master the rhythm, all you really accomplished was to irritate every adult within a quarter mile. It was a far cry from Daytona International Speedway, but Auburndale had the area's only racetrack. Dirt, dust, fist, and fast cars. Lots of excitement on the weekends. Heck, sometimes there were demolition derbies in addition to the races. We were strategically located in the center of the state, about an hour and a half to 2 hours to the nearest saltwater beach, but don't think for a minute that we were without options for fun and sun in the water and sand. We had Max Beach in Auburndale, a huge beach on Lake Ariana with white sand and lots of swings, slides, and such. Winter Haven had the beach at Lake Silver, but it didn't quite match up to Max. Winter Haven did have the 100 Lakes Motel, though. They had a huge pool that was open to the public. I believe it cost a quarter to swim all day. It was my first time to ever swim in a pool. We had one slot car track in Winter Haven. I never had the privilege of being able to own one or even run on one of the tracks, but man, were they ever cool to watch. I remember sneaking off with my buddy Pokey Jenkins to ride our bikes all the way into Winter Haven from our home in Inwood just to watch the cars. Our mamas would have had a conniption fit for sure, if they'd ever found out. Winter Haven was home to a beautiful old school movie theater at the Ritz. Lots of red velvet carpets and curtains, and it had a balcony. Pretty snazzy indeed. Before Home Depot, before Lowe's, we had our own homegrown hardware superstore, Scotty's. It's still there, been there as long as I can remember, and still serving my mother's favorite, the fruit salad shake. Some things just never change. Kind of like People's Barbecue in Auburndale. You still have the option of dining in an unair-conditioned shed with a dirt floor if you wish. A unique and tasty dining experience for sure, but check first, they aren't open all year. For quite a few years we had a distinctively different pizza place in town. J. Burns Pizza was the place to be while I was in high school. Not 40 different varieties of pizza, just a couple and a couple of sandwiches and salads. The pizza had crispy crust and it was cut into these little squares. My favorite was the one with chopped up pepperoni and mushrooms. They left us for a few years, but they've returned in Auburndale and Lakeland. It's still good, just not as good as the original. The Cape Pock Tree Inn in Clearwater. What a great date destination. You thought you were high class for sure. Didn't they have little white cookies that must have had crack in them? You just couldn't get enough of those things. I'll bet more than one of you spent many a freezing night keeping the smudge pots burning in orange groves in our area. Or how about throwing hay? Or tossing watermelons in the summer? You might have even picked a little bit of fruit just to earn some extra cash. I can't remember if this was for a wedding or a fox and hound purchase to head over to Orlando in the disco clubs. Either way, I was rocking that suit and the fro. As you could see from the previous picture, I was 6'2" in high school with a 6-inch plus afro. The last thing I needed was platform shoes, but I had to have them. Mine were emerald green with gold stitching. I couldn't walk in those things without constantly turning my ankles and tripping. But man, oh man, wasn't I cool. Definitely remember the leisure suits. I don't know who these two guys are, but I remember my mother made me a sky blue polyester leisure suit. I sure wish I still had it. It wouldn't fit, but I still wish I had it. These are just a few of the things I remember about growing up in Winter Haven and Auburndale. Hope you enjoyed the past few minutes of my memories, and hope you even shared a few.